Hi, Vladimir Putin is currently touring Asia, and we saw the surreal images of him with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And at the same time, we see the Western countries warmongering at a level I did not think is physically possible. Due to all these events, I wanted to go back to the interview of Putin by Tucker Carlson from 6th of February this year, which I haven't covered so far. The question is if we can analyze their body language to better understand what is going on, in particular since the truth becomes victim of propaganda first in wars. So what are we dealing with here? Putin, before becoming president of Russia, was a foreign intelligence officer for the KGB for 15 years, including 6 years in Dresden, former East Germany. He speaks fluently German and is pretty good in English. He was also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum and in close relationship with Klaus Schwab since 1992. Before that, he was judo champion for Leningrad in 1976. And in terms of upbringing, his father was a submariner in World War II, and his mother almost died during the siege of Leningrad. She buried 2 of her sons before giving birth to Vladimir at the age of 41. On the other hand, Tucker Carlson had the desire to join the CIA but did not get accepted. Or did he? He was a conservative political commentator for Fox News in the US from 2009 to 2023 and now runs Tucker on X. Before Fox, he worked for CNN, PBS, and MSNBC. Tucker's father, Dick Carlson, was longest-serving director of Voice of America, appointed by Ronald Reagan. Voice of America was a state-owned multimedia organization, also called CIA's propaganda network by the New York Times. So, in short, we are dealing with 2 individuals strongly influencing the history of the world, with close or immediate ties to the secret services in the US and Russia. Okay, so let's get started. I picked a few highlights which stood out to me.
On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO...
Interesting that the chair is partially on the carpet and partially on the wooden parquet floor, which struck me as puzzling because it's uneven.
...might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote.
This is a bit like behind-the-scenes footage you sometimes see after the credits of a comedy movie. It shows that this is just a show or theater play. At least it shows they are so familiar and relaxed with each other that they can joke around, that this is in fact not a serious conversation. And it ends with hysterical laughter by Tucker. Again, like it is a comedy show. This is in stark contrast to Putin only speaking Russian, which gives the illusion that Russia is at a distant place in the world and very foreign. And later again,
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview. That is why I asked you at the beginning, are we going to have a serious talk or a show? You said a serious talk. So bear with me, please. We're coming. So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
Let's look where our relationship with Ukraine started from. Where did Ukraine come from? The Russian state started gathering itself as a centralized statehood, and it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862.
So it's going back to 800 something to justify the invasion of the Ukraine. So he's launching here into a roughly 30-minute history lecture on the Ukraine and Russia. So Putin, the guy who normally does not say a lot, gives this fluid, detail-oriented monologue without errors, gaps, or misspeaking ones, which would make any celebrity professor pale in envy. When interrupted, he quickly finds his way back into his speech. All this is incredibly difficult to achieve while in front of a camera and would require extensive preparations and training. And I suspect this is also what the earpiece is for.
When the townspeople of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign.
So basically, Tucker is completely frozen in his facial expression. He looks stern, concentrated, he has a surprised look. These anger lines actually mean concentration here. And normally facial expressions are fleeting expressions, but since it's frozen, it's played. It's a mask. It also makes him look dumbstruck and flabbergasted. Tucker's eyebrows also remind me of Kasparov some years back, when he was still an active chess player, and he wanted to make chess more interesting to the audience by having weird facial expressions and outbursts of emotions. And this somehow reminds me of it, because it's also very slow. And to make it more dramatic, they use these facial expressions.
A horde, but they managed to preserve some part of their sovereignty.
And here Putin shows a middle finger, an emblem of international meaning.
And in fact rejected their demands. They turned to Moscow, so that Moscow took them away. So that you don't think that I'm inventing things.
Watch Tucker Carlson's mouth opening in surprise and Putin smirking, completely enjoying the show.
I'll give you these documents.
Look at him. My God.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're inventing it. I'm not sure why it's relevant to what happened 2 years ago.
But still, these are documents from the archives, copies. Here are the letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the man who then controlled the power in this part of the Russian lands that is now called Ukraine. He wrote to Warsaw demanding that their rights be upheld.
He basically claims that Ukraine was part of Russia. The remarkable thing is that he spends time on getting the documents from the archive to hand them over, but later we will see he shows no evidence that the US or Ukraine bombed Nord Stream 2, the billion-dollar investment of Russia. I find this the most remarkable thing.
And after being refused, he began to write letters to Moscow, asking to take them under the strong hand of the Moscow Tsar. There are copies of these documents. I will leave them for your good memory. There is a translation into Russian. You can translate it into English later. Russia would not agree to admit them straight away, assuming that the war with Poland would start. Nevertheless...
So what's the point of this lecture? It shows that Putin is obsessed and relentless. It's a filibuster strategy by using a large part of the interview time on irrelevant stuff to have less time on the important things. It's also domineering behavior. First he bulldozes over his interviewer with details, he wears him out, overloads him with information, and it's intimidating because he's displaying knowledge his opponent does not have. That gives him the upper hand in the interview from the start. By displaying also such mental agility, flexibility, sharpness, but also humor, he contrasts himself sharply with senile Biden, and I think this was the main purpose of this interview.
At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it.
Would you have joined NATO?
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere...
Would Russia join NATO? This is the dumbest, senseless question I've heard in a long time. NATO was founded in 1949, right after the start of the Cold War in 1947, I think, to protect against the Soviet Union. So why would Russia join a military treaty which is directed against itself? This seems to indicate that they are not taking their audiences very seriously.
And we created hypersonic systems with intercontinental range, and we continue to develop them. We are now ahead of everyone, the United States and the other countries, in terms of the development of hypersonic strike systems, and we are improving them every day. But it wasn't us. We proposed to go the other way, and we were pushed back. Now, about NATO's expansion to the east. Well, we were promised no NATO to the east.
So he's talking about hypersonic missiles. All of a sudden we are led to believe that Russia is ahead of the US in high-tech missiles. And this after decades of the world having to consume US military propaganda movies like Top Gun and so on. So again, the audience is not taken very seriously. This is just a show.
I wanted to ask the then US leadership.
With the backing of whom?
With the backing of CIA, of course. The organization you wanted to join back in the day, as I understand. We should thank God they didn't let you in. Although, it is a serious organization.
So there are two things. So he's talking about the CIA-backed coup in the Ukraine, in 2014. And also in the short clip, he makes fun of Tucker Carlson, that he was not allowed to join the CIA even he wanted to. So he's trying to use humor, and Tucker Carlson's face is just frozen and he doesn't respond at all. Even so, the joke is at his expense. So he's made fun of, even insulted in a way, and he looks completely stupefied. But the main thing I wanted to talk about, he's talking about the coup in the Ukraine, which, according to Putin, started the whole war. But we see no signs of anger. He has a smiley face, super relaxed like he's on vacation. He even jokes around. He makes a joke about Tucker Carlson at this moment. I think this is remarkable.
And that is how it looks now.
But what is, pardon my ignorance, what is denazification? What would that mean? What is...
Да, вот я как раз хочу сейчас об этом сказать. Это очень важный вопрос. Денацификация.
That is what I want to talk about right now. It is a very important issue. Denazification. After gaining independence, Ukraine...
That was interesting. Here's a little break in Putin's behavior. When he's asked about denazification, he pauses, he uses filler words, saying that that's what he wants to talk about. He leans to the right and looks also to the right for quite a while.
Began to search, as some Western analysts say, its identity. And it came up with nothing better than to build this identity upon some false heroes who collaborated with Hitler. But due to the...
So that's different from his earlier speech. Looking to the right. So here, because of the pauses as well, I would think he's waiting for instructions in his earpiece. And also this break in behavior tells me that this is not some advanced deepfake AI-generated video, unless it's super advanced, and that all of this is already factored in, these human imperfections. Yeah, he looks more distant here, and he does look in the distant, and he seems absent-minded somehow.
Historical development. Those territories were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Poland, where Ukrainians were persecuted.
So he's concentrating on something. And because the earpiece is on his right, there's a tendency then to look in this direction. It's like someone is speaking to him from the right. So that would be a natural response. And also this earpiece allowed him to give this history lecture earlier.
Talk to him about it.
I'm definitely interested, but from the outside, it seems like this could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
What's there to work out? It's very simple. I repeat. We have contacts through various agencies.
I think this is an interesting moment in the interview, and I find this remarkable. Instead of picking up the phone, he rather sends hundreds of thousands of soldiers to the front. and into the meat grinder. We now clearly see that Putin is also not one of the good guys. To make this single phone call appear more difficult to make, he only speaks Russian here in this interview, making the US and Russia appear far apart and foreign to each other.
Realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end, and realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions. It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
Here Tucker changed the topic very quickly. That's a general strategy to knock the interviewer out of balance. And then Putin says, you.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did.
Again, such a serious topic. It's $1 billion investment by Russia, and they are laughing and joking around.
Apple up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби. У вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Знаете,
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion.
So instead of showing actually evidence, becoming serious for a moment, we get this very generic response. So no new information at all, no proof. Instead we get some old documents from the Russian archives. He could have used these 2 hours to show actual proof of bioweapon labs and Nazis in the Ukraine, or that the CIA or the Ukraine bombed the pipeline. Again, this shows that Putin is also not one of the good guys. And this also shows how the alternative media tries to polarize people, making military conflict more and more likely.
Make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end.
So this is the only moment in the interview where Putin plays the tough guy. When he says fight to the end, he puts the fingers to the temples. I guess that illustrates a gun put the head, suggesting potentially that the US is self-destructing. So we see actually that Putin is quite expressive. Yeah, much more than Tucker Carlson, using illustrators like hand gestures, switching in this little episode between a bit of angry and aggressive to complete laughter. So to me, this indicates that changing behavior in a very short amount of time, that none of these feelings are sincere. So to me, this looks more like how an actor would do it, that the feelings are not particularly deep and that they can be switched very easily. In summary, we saw parts of the lengthy 2-hour-long interview of Putin, which started with a bizarre 30-minute-long history lecture, so fluid and flawless, any history professor would envy him for. Surprisingly, we saw little signs of anger, aggression, or concern in Putin's face and behavior or body language, and also no signs of willingness to initiate new rounds of diplomacy. He rather sends hundreds of thousands of Russian troops into battle and death than picking up the phone to call Biden. We did not even see a serious Putin. In contrast, he was surprisingly light-hearted, joyful, dynamic, humorous, knowledgeable, smart on his feet and talkative, despite a bit of war going on at the Russian border. Personally, I think this was the main purpose of the interview, to show himself in full control of his senses in stark contrast to senile Biden. The message was that he is a rational, ultra-focused, a bit obsessive guy, and that the West is mad and self-destructing. But since this interview was allowed to wander through social media with more than 200 million views on X, which makes it the most watched interview in history, and since Tucker has close ties to the CIA, I would say that the whole thing was planned, designed, basically a theater play. Tucker's face was frozen in a tense surprise look while stoic Putin was more knowledgeable and eloquent than a US news anchor, well, like Tucker basically, or a celebrity professor. I'm guessing that this is what the earpiece hidden on the side away from the camera was really for, as he speaks English. To me, both sides seem to work together to start World War III, and on Telegram I speculate more about this. With this video, I also want to use the occasion to advocate for peace and diplomacy, and that I'm not for either side. It's likely both sides are in it together. If some elites want war, that's fine, but then they should themselves take a gun, go to the front and shoot each other. I certainly won't be part of any of it. I'm now very curious what you think about these current developments and how you interpret this interview. Hope you liked my analysis and that you get something useful out of it. Thank you for watching, and I talk to you soon. Bye.